Elden Ring is the brightest and most light-hearted game From Software has ever produced, but that doesn't stop them from adding a bunch of really horrifying creatures. Which I mean, every game has its fair share of pretty scary enemies, but at the end of the day, the ones made by From Software always carry that extra layer of dread and tragedy. The catch is, in fact, that all these creatures are barely surviving in the lands between themselves. In Elden Ring, becoming an abomination is usually the end result of a massive tragedy. Whether they were enslaved by society, warped by a toxic religion, or literally dropped out of the cosmos, every freak in this game has a brutal history attached to it. If we really want to understand these nightmares, we have to look past their jagged teeth and ugly designs. We need to check out the environments they are trapped in, piece together the item descriptions, their sound design, and figure out exactly how they ended up so terrifying. Liurnia is massive and beautiful, filled with some of the most beautiful vistas made by From Software, but that does not really make up for a pretty disturbing encounter that happened with me in the early hours. While I was wandering through its misty waters, I stumbled upon a place known as Laskia Ruins, and I was immediately drawn in. The whole area is bathed in a thick, moody fog with crumbling stone archways and sunken creatures rising quietly out of the shallow water. It feels incredibly atmospheric and perfectly still. But while I was approaching a small shrine with a strange portal, without any warning, a massive multi-limbed creature violently erupted from the dirt directly through the portal. Once this thing is out of the ground, you realize exactly how messed up its design really is. If you get a close look at its head, it has surprisingly human features, but the neck is severely crooked. The skin is unnaturally stretched, and its mouth and eyes are pulled wide open. Right on top of its head is a detailed gold crown, set with some jewels, which gives us our first clue this creature comes from some sort of royal lineage. At first glance, you probably would think this is just another victim of grafting, similar to Godric's twisted experiments. But if you strip away the tattered clothing covering its body, the anatomy tells us a much darker story. Looking at its naked body, you don't see it having any normal torso at all. It uses one set of reversed legs as a base. From there, multiple torsos awkwardly branch upward and outward. These branching torsos sprout their own long, pale arms, with elongated fingers at that. There is even a massive tumor-like arm protruding right out its back. The scariest part is that these extra limbs do not look so stitched or grafted on. They look like they grew naturally out of the creature's own flesh, almost like branches forking off of a tree trunk. If I had to describe the silhouette in plain language, I would call it a spider made out of corpses, or a centipede-like human abomination. Low to the ground, long-limbed, hunched, and asymmetrical, with the face tucked inside a dark hood and the body split into several uneven masses. When you check out its underside, the lower abdomen is completely hollowed out. It looks like the bottom half of the torso is violently removed or just rotted away over time. Then there is the sound it makes. The scream sounds like a standard monster at first, but the catch is that it is not a natural roar. It sounds like the creature is screaming with absolute difficulty, struggling to force the noise out of its throat. It instantly reminds me of the agonizing shrieks of the cleric beast from Bloodborne. The fight itself is pure panic. It rushes you with a relentless fury of wild slaps and spits toxic poison. Even fleeing is useless, because it will just dive back into the ground and teleport right next to you to cut off your escape. It fights aggressively, almost like it absolutely despises the very fact that you are alive. But once you start to look even closer at the royal revenant anatomy, a lot of terrifying questions start to pop up. Why are they in this state? What causes them to teleport? And why do they spit poison? Through the tattered veil, we saw initially that they don't have their limbs grafted on their bodies just like Godric's experiments do, like the grafted scions. Grafting is a crude surgical process. If you look at Godric or his scions, you can see the seams. You see mismatched skin tones, physical stitches, and raw stumps where different bodies were forced together. The royal revenant has none of that. Their limbs are entirely uniform. They share the identical sickly pale skin and smooth integration. They do not have limbs slapped onto them. They mutated and grew them naturally. Instead of a single human spine with ribs, their anatomy is stacked and segmented like a massive fleshy centipede. Something that I personally have been wondering about is the fact that they are easily able to teleport and appear right next to the players. Something I have figured out is that they are closely tied to the enemies that worship them, the Wraith Callers. Wraiths in Elden Ring are specifically the vengeful spirits of those who died while cursed. The Revenant itself operates partially as a spirit as it phases through the physical earth of the land between, slipping into a spectral plane for a brief second to cut off your escape. The prison is equally tragic. In this world, poison is almost always a direct result of deep stagnation and rot. With their lower abdomens completely hollowed out and their bodies trapped in forgotten subterranean ruins, these creatures are essentially rotting from the inside out. I really don't think the toxic bile they spit is a weapon they consciously learned to use. Sure, mechanically they aim it right at you during the fight, but from a lore perspective, it feels much more like an involuntary reflex. They are so sick and decayed that this poisonous sludge constantly builds up inside whatever is left of their organs. Regurgitating it is just a necessity to purge the suffocating rot from their system. Another peculiar detail is tied to their exact name. By definition, a revenant is a person who has returned from the dead. But why are they explicitly called royal revenants? Besides the obvious crown sitting on their head, you have to look at the tattered garb they wear. The clothing does not have any obvious crests or faction symbols to pin them to a specific house. However, the fabric clearly has a golden tint to it. In the lands between, gold is the universal signature of the Erd Tree and the Golden Order. This strongly implies they were part of the high aristocracy or directly tied to the Golden Order lineage before they met their end. This royal status makes even more sense when you look at where they actually spawn. You don't find them wandering randomly. They appear in very specific lore-heavy locations like the King's Realm Ruins, the Luna Estate, Celia Hideaway, and Elphael, Brace of the Halleck Tree. There is a massive recurring connection to Carrion royalty in these spots. Because of this, a major theory within the community is that these creatures are the cursed remains of Carrion nobility. Alternatively, they might be high-ranking aristocrats who tried to flee the strict rule of the Golden Order to find refuge at the Halleck Tree. They just never made it. Instead, they succumbed to a horrific curse along the journey, dying and returning as these twisted, trapped abominations. This connection to death is cemented even further in the shadow of the Erd Tree DLC. During an encounter, a tibia marina, an ancient entity tied to the very roots of death, can actually summon a royal revenant to fight you. This confirms they hold a deep foundational connection to the true cursed death of the world. Something else is a popular exploit found in the game that might be tied to the curse of these creatures. Players universally hate fighting these things, provoking an overwhelming screw those things in particular reaction from the community because of how deadly they are. But players found an exploit. Casting a simple area of effect healing incarnation like Heal or Great Heal can absolutely destroy or even two-shot them. Why does a heal spell act like a bomb? If we accept that revenants are a filled mass of flesh trying to hold itself together, applying pure restorative magic to a body meant to be broken causes severe internal panic. What I think happens is that when you heal them, their stitched mutated body parts violently attempt to correct themselves back to their original human forms all at once. The healing magic literally tears their centipede-like structure apart from the inside. Interestingly, while healing destroys them, they actually have a high resistance to standard holy damage. This perfectly aligns with their lore. In Elden Ring, holy damage is the specific power of the Golden Order. Because these revenants were once nobles and royalty living under the Golden Order, they retain a latent built-in resistance to it, even as their cursed bodies are falling apart at the slightest touch of genuine healing. Deep underground in Liania, when I encountered Astel for the first time, it was more than evident that Elden Ring's horror is largely contributed by cosmic entities as well, just like Astel. Encountering this entity for the first time is deeply repulsive. It is a malformed star that crashed down from a lightless abyss, and when you really start breaking down its anatomy, the lore hidden in its design, and its horrifying life cycle, you realize that Astel is arguably the most complex and deeply unsettling creature From Software has ever created. The immediate visual shock that I got from Astel is definitely the unnatural mix of insectoid and humanoid features. First, we should look at its head. Astel operates with massive black mandibles protruding from its face. They heavily resemble the jaws of a stag beetle. Now, a lot of people who fear insects don't necessarily fear beetles simply because they are rarely harmful to humans. But this is a From Software game. Those mandibles are not here just to look intimidating or fight for a mate, but they deal massive damage. And while the creature is idle, it moves the mandibles and produces a creepy, hollow clicking sound typical of a giant insect. The rest of the body is just as bizarre. Astel essentially resembles a great dragonfly. Its long segmented spine is formed from a procession of multicolored orbs and starry debris held together by intermediate glowing planetary rings that look like Saturn. It suspends itself using 4 delicate translucent wings that deeply resemble a dragonfly. Its long tail is covered in sharp spikes and ends in a stinger, which it violently wields like a scorpion's tail. And then there is the face. Tucked right behind these crushing beetle jaws is a disturbingly realistic human skull. It does not look like a generalized monster face at first glance, as the skull of the creature has distinct human features, including a nose cavity, eye sockets, and human-esque teeth. Something that I found out to be pretty odd is the fact that those teeth don't have those canine or predatory features you can expect from that of a predator. Instead, they are just normal teeth you would expect any other human to have. This means that the mandibles were used to catch larger prey and cut them down to bits, and then the human teeth might have been used to chew the prey into smaller bites and swallow it. During the fight, this skull violently tears open to reveal Astel's true eye. It is a massive central orb swelling with cosmic colors, complete with an actively moving iris and pupil. Interestingly, if you use external tools to separate this eye from the in-game model, it actually looks remarkably like a plant. This might not just be an eye. It could be a raw fragment of the cosmos itself. The English title, Natural Born of the Void, suggests that Astel is an intended product of outer space, functioning as an elemental force acting exactly as the universe designed. Analyzing the original Japanese text and early game files reveals a starkly different narrative. Astel is not a natural occurrence. The original Japanese name, Ankoku no Toshigo translates directly to illegitimate child or bastard of the void. A natural-born entity is pure and intended, whereas an illegitimate child is unwanted or the result of some form of corruption. The cosmos did not intentionally send Astel to the lands between. It expelled it. The weapon, Bastard Stars, crafted from Astel's remembrance, is the only piece of English text that preserves this original meaning. This concept of illegitimacy is supported by the game's development history. In version 1.0 of Elden Ring, Astel was officially named Astel, Misbegotten of the Void. During this early build, the terrestrial enemy faction known as Misbegotten were categorized internally as aberrations. Within the lore of the Golden Order, the Misbegotten are a shunned enslaved race viewed as impure mutants and mistakes, falling outside the grace of the Erdtree. This means that Astel was rejected to a certain degree. The core implication of these naming conventions is that Astel is a galactic outcast. Just as the terrestrial world rejects the mutated Misbegotten, the cosmos rejected Astel. It is a deformed offspring of the dark. When Astel landed, it brought absolute ruin. Item descriptions explicitly state that it destroyed an eternal city, taking away their false sky in the process. It wields the immense gravitational power that brought it down, projecting beams of gravity magic from its mouth, leaving volatile trails of gravitational energy and warping across the massive arena. Another pretty fascinating aspect of Astel is that it seems to be an evolution of a falling star beast. If you explore the overworld, you have undoubtedly fought the falling star beast. These creatures can be found inhabiting massive impact craters across both the base game maps and the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Just like Astel, they crash-landed from somewhere in outer space. If you put a falling star beast and Astel side by side, the physical similarities are undeniable. In both their immature and fully grown variants, the beasts possess the exact same long black mandibles protruding from their faces. They possess long weaponized tails that grow larger and spikier as they mature, eventually matching the massive scorpion tail of Astel. They also share an affinity for manipulating gravity to varying degrees. While the immature beasts lack discernible eyes, the fully grown ones develop the exact same large centralized eyeball found inside Astel's skull. This connection is confirmed by an incredible detail hidden in the game's models. If you look closely at the mature falling star beast, slightly below its central eye, you can see the outline of a facial structure hidden beneath a thick layer of fur and fluff. I think the biological inspiration for this cycle comes from a real-world insect called the Myrmiliontidae, commonly known as the antlion. In its larval form, a terrestrial antlion burrows a hole in the sand, which is also referred as a death pit, used to trap passing prey and gorge itself. The stubby terrestrial body and prominent mandibles of the larval antlion are a dead ringer for the falling star beast sitting inside the impact crater. Even the mandibles of the antlion closely resemble the falling star beast's mandibles. Once the antlion consumes enough food, it undergoes a radical transformation. It sheds its stubby body for an elongated spindly frame and grows prominent translucent wings, becoming an antlion lacewing. This perfectly mirrors the progression of the falling star beast retreating into the dark underground caves to mature into the thin, spindly, iridescent winged entity known as Astel. But the insectoid life cycle does not end at maturation. Elden Ring actually shows us the eventual death of these cosmic beings. Across the game, we encounter 3 distinct variations of Astels, representing different stages of their life. First, there is the prime boss, the natural born of the void. Second, hidden away in a frozen cavern inside the Yellow Annex tunnel in the consecrated snowfields, you find Astel, Stars of Darkness. This variant is functionally similar but possesses a terrifying grab attack, where it summons multiple clones of itself to disorient and crush the player. Finally, there are the lesser unnamed variants. You can find these hanging from the ceilings in underground areas like the Astel River depths and the Perfumer's Grotto. These dangling creatures share the exact same physical model as the boss, but they look drastically different. We can actually find out what is happening to them through the official English and Japanese guidebooks. These hanging enemies are referred to as Astiru Kare, which translates to withered Astel. A specific kanji used in Japanese is a term used to describe a plant that is actively withering and dying. These lesser Astels are simply mature creatures that have reached the very end of their lifespan. Their gravitational magic is failing, their mobility is gone, and they are quietly dangling in the dark, waiting to die and return to the void. The constant looming threat of these cosmic invaders crashing into the Earth is the exact reason General Radahn famously conquered the stars. He halted their movements to prevent any more falling star beasts and Astels from laying waste to the lands between. There is actually a fascinating remnant of this conflict hidden deep in the game's internal data. Astel possesses a fully functional unused animation where it falls from the sky and crashes into the Earth like a living meteor. Notably, this unused animation utilizes the exact same visual effects that Radahn uses during his infamous orbital meteor strike attack. Given the massive size of the arena required for such a move, and the heavy overlap in visual effects, many players theorize that Astel might have originally been planned as part of the Radahn festival fight. The logic is sound. With Radahn's death, the stars immediately resume their movement. This could have originally translated into an Astel immediately crashing down onto the battlefield to fight the player. Alternatively, there might have been a specific overworld location where an Astel would crash land immediately following Radahn's defeat. Over the course of development, this concept was likely reworked, giving Radahn the meteor attack and making Astel a completely separate underground boss fight. Elden Ring relies heavily on item descriptions to deliver its primary narrative. When an enemy type lacks a single line of text across the entire game, its history must be reconstructed entirely through environmental placements, behavioral observations, and internal data. The wormfaces exist in this exact space. They are completely undocumented and have no items particularly associated with them in their internal data. Observe a wormface in the Altus Plateau. From a distance, they appear as towering, grotesque monstrosities, heavily shrouded in discolored, filthy cloth. Their most prominent feature is the cluster of writhing organisms protruding from the front of their heads. However, a closer inspection of their character models reveals that they have severe parasitic infections of some sorts. Beneath the worms, the entity has a clearly defined, albeit elongated, human head. The skin is mottled and pockmarked. Personally, I find these creatures' skin to be heavily dried. It also has a ton of marks on its skin, which looks awfully eerie. Crucially, they possess human ears on the sides of their heads. Their limbs, while stretched to unnatural proportions, end in fully formed human hands and feet. Whatever these creatures are, they seem to be severely deformed humans. Their audio also strongly suggests that they retain some human consciousness. Wormfaces do not roar or hiss. They cough violently, perfectly mimicking the sound of a sick human expelling fluid. They sit in groups, hunched over and shivering. When they aren't aggroed, they can be heard weeping and muttering gibberish, as if they are attempting to speak, pray, or curse at someone. Even their laughter sounds mournful. This audio design points to a terrifying conclusion. The wormfaces are entirely self-aware. They're experiencing constant misery and are fully conscious of their own degradation. The internal label for these creatures are titled as dégracine. This is a French word that translates directly to uprooted. It is also the title of a 2018 PlayStation VR game developed by From Software, indicating it is a word that developers find conceptually significant. To understand the word dégracine, we must examine the wormface's relationship with the environment, specifically the minor Erd trees. In the lands between, through the process of Erd tree burial, the roots act as a conduit for reincarnation and the recycling of souls back into the grace of the Golden Order. A literal uprooting means pulling a plant out of the dirt. The wormfaces do exactly this to survive. In the game's world, the roots of the Erd tree are a massive graveyard. The people of the Golden Order bury their dead bodies in these roots so their souls can be reborn. Because Godwyn's cursed body is buried deep below, the roots and the bodies are poisoned with the death curse. The wormfaces may have dug into the earth and chewed on the roots, or they may have been affected by the death roots somehow. I think that this is the reason why they spew death blight. There is also a huge population of wormfaces near the minor Erd tree in the Altus Plateau. They act as guardians to the point that there is a huge wormface boss near the minor Erd tree instead of an actual Erd tree avatar. Also, the items found near them are deeply tied to the Golden Order, the Golden Slam Ash of War, the Wrath of Gold Incantation, and the Icon Shield. Additionally, their combat stats reveal a heavy resistance to holy damage, but an extreme vulnerability to slashing damage. Since slash damage is affected to creatures who are more humanoid and bleed, in the traditional sense, this kind of vaguely confirms as well about their humanoid status. But regardless, the combination of holy resistance, their gathering around the Erd tree, their human features, and their protective garbs suggests they were once priests, monks, or highly devoted followers of the Golden Order. When the shattering occurred and the Golden Order collapsed, they were left abandoned. Another interesting point about these creatures is that a distinct population of wormfaces also exist in the crumbling Farum Azula, a ruined city suspended in a storm beyond time. The wormfaces in Farum Azula dress differently. They wear cleaner, finer wrappings and are adorned with medallions, indicating a higher status or a different cultural background. Their presence here is highly anomalous, as Farum Azula is disconnected from the terrestrial lands between. But the real question is that how did these creatures end up in crumbling Farum Azula? The key is Malekith, the Black Blade. Malekith resides in Farum Azula. In the lands between, he operates under the disguise of Garang, consuming Deathroot to eliminate it from the world. By bringing Deathroot back to Farum Azula, Malekith unwittingly introduced the curse to the crumbling Farum Azula. However, a visual clue suggests the wormfaces might actually be native to Farum Azula rather than immigrants from Altus. Inside Malekith's boss arena, the ancient stone murals depict tall, slender figures with elongated heads wrapped in cloth. Crucially, these carved figures do not have worms on their faces. This implies that the long-necked humanoid form was the original natural state. They were likely early denizens of Farum Azula, existing alongside the Beastmen before the beasts were granted 5 fingers and higher intelligence. When Malekith brought the Deathroot, these native priests were infected, resulting in the parasitic worms. The population found in Altus Plateau may be descendants who fell from the crumbling city or were exiled, seeking solace at the minor Erd tree, only to find the same curse waiting for them in the roots. There are 2 severe anomalies regarding the wormfaces that require specific attention. First is the gender divide within the game files. Every common wormface encountered is labeled Derastine male. They carry sticks, travel in packs, and have empty mouths beneath their facial worms. The larger variants, including the boss at the minor Erd tree, are labeled Derastine female. These matriarchs are massive and wear a delicate off-white shawl trimmed with lace, a garment resembling a maiden's dress. Furthermore, the females have a secondary cluster of worms moving actively inside their open mouths. But the real question is, what is the function of this gender difference? I think having this gender difference actually mirrors insect or parasitic hive structures. The females act as carriers or queens. The extra worms inside the mouth suggests they are primary incubators for the parasite. The lace shawl indicates they may have held a high sacred position, akin to finger maidens, before the corruption took hold. The males guard the territory, while the females stand at the base of the Erd tree, consuming the bulk of the infected roots to sustain the colony. Something else that is quite fascinating is the fact that the female variants of these creatures are way larger than the male counterparts. I think this connection is something that is also closely tied to insect biology. In the natural world, the extreme size difference between genders is known as sexual dimorphism. Spiders, praying mantises, and certain insects display this exact physical trait. The female requires a massive body to store energy, produce offspring, and ensure the survival of their species. The male exists primarily to mate, and then is oftentimes consumed by the females. Similarly, I think that similar logic applies in this scenario as well. Something that I also found to be rather interesting is that the larger variant near the minor Erd tree wears a delicate lace shawl. This might highlight her previous rank in society as a high-ranking member, or a priestess in fact. But at the end of the day, that is just speculation, so anything can be the outcome. The common male worm faces operate exactly like worker drones or soldier ants. As the defenders of the group, they are smaller, weaker, and spawn in much larger numbers than the matriarchs. These males actively patrol their territory, wandering the outer borders of the forest in packs and carrying wooden sticks to guard the perimeter. Their lives are entirely disposable. Survival is not important to the colony. If they die in combat, their infected bodies simply fall and return the death curse to the soil. This structural breakdown proves that the worm faces operate in a highly organized manner, which is heavily inspired by real-world insect colonies. Also, the last interesting insight about these creatures would be a specific trap found in Mount Galmer. Near the withered minor Erd tree in that region, you can find what appears to be a frail hollow sitting by a fire. However, when you kill this enemy, the noble instantly transforms into a massive, highly aggressive female wormface. This creature is actually a disguised silver tear. This specific encounter reveals an important detail about the nature of the wormface infection. The mimic tears from the Eternal Cities are designed to perfectly copy the structure and combat abilities of their targets. The crucial question is, why the silver tear chooses to assume the form of a wormface over any other creatures? I think the answer lies in survival of the fittest. Silver tears survive by copying the most lethal apex predators in their immediate environment. Near the corrupted roots of Mount Gelmer, the female wormface is the dominant threat. By taking the form of a matriarch, the mimic tear gains immense physical size and the deadly ability to expel death blight. Albinaurics are really not horrifying from a design perspective, and honestly, any other creature could have gotten that title. But I personally think that the horrors of these creatures are definitely tied to what they have become and what made them become so. If we look at real-world alchemy, specifically the 16th century, life according to those theories was made up of three primes. There is salt, which acts as a solid body, mercury, which serves as the fluid, and sulfur, which is the soul. The albinaurics are heavily tied to silver and mercury. The blue-silver armor worn by the archers explicitly states it was forged from the same mother as the archers themselves, and we clearly see them bleed silver. They have the salt and the mercury to form the body and the mind. But because they are artificial creations, the Golden Order believes they are missing the sulfur. They are viewed as unnatural beings, missing a soul. This artificial nature means their bodies are flawed, leading to a split in their evolutionary line. The first generation represents a failed attempt at perfection. They possess highly humanoid proportionate features, but as old Albus tells us, their legs simply fade away into nothingness over time. This immovable fate forces them to crawl or ride wolves to survive. There is also a split within the first generation. All the young, combat-ready archers we see are female, while the decrepit, fading villagers are male. The creators were likely trying to replicate the divine duality of Marika and Radahn, but failed. This resulted in a fractured species. The second generation served as the creators' attempt to fix initial flaws. They successfully engineered fully functional legs, allowing these beings to walk, cartwheel, and jump. However, in doing so, they created dumpy, malformed creatures with massive frog-like heads and completely stripped away their ability to speak. The albinaurics are perhaps the closest thing Elden Ring has to true synthetic humans. But what exactly are they, and why are they so universally despised? The answer boils down to a single ideological conflict with the ruling powers. They are life created entirely by human hands, and because they exist completely outside the natural grace-given cycle of the Erd Tree, the fundamentalists view them as impure beings. The game constantly questions whether these artificial creatures actually possess souls. When you strike an albinauric in combat, they do not bleed red. They bleed a thick silvery white liquid, which is a very clear visual indicator that they are not natural flesh and blood. Yet, despite this, they express genuine fear. They form tight-knit communities. They care for their mounts, and they weep for their dead. The Golden Order, however, does not care about these displays of humanity. To the Erd Tree faithful, if you are not touched by grace, you are nothing. This hatred trickles down to almost every faction in the game, most notably the Cuckoo Knights of Raya Lucaria. The Knights actively hunt the albinaurics for sport, claiming their silver blood is completely defiled. You can even craft an albinauric pot using their coagulated blood to disrupt enemy spellcasting, which shows exactly how they are treated as livestock. I think one of the reasons why albinaurics are treated like garbage definitely boils down to the dictatorship and ruling with an iron fist. In human history, rulers and authoritarian regimes have always restricted freedom, crushed dissent, and strictly controlled the narrative to ensure the masses do not rebel. To maintain that total control and justify their harsh laws, a dictatorship almost always requires a scapegoat. They need an outgroup to point to marginalized people they can label as a stain on the system. This tactic unites the in-group in fear and hatred, keeping their anger focused downward on the oppressed rather than directed upward at the ruling class. When looking at the darkest chapters of our own history, the atrocities committed by Nazi Germany serve as the most horrifying example of this authoritarian tactic taken to its absolute extreme. Hitler's regime orchestrated the Holocaust, systematically dehumanizing Jewish people, Romani people, disabled individuals, and other targeted groups by legally classifying them as subhuman and a direct threat to the nation's survival. Elden Ring heavily draws upon these to build the lore of the Golden Order. Within the lands between, the people were obsessed with the concept of grace. Similarly, Hitler was obsessed with the concept of an Aryan race, which were tall people with blonde hair and blue eyes. Marika's Golden Order dictates something similar. The ones touched by the Erd Tree's grace are valid, pure, and worthy of living within the system. Because the albinaurics are artificial beings created by human hands, they fall entirely outside this. They are scientifically and biologically different, bleeding silver instead of red, and lacking the golden grace that the state demands. Therefore, the ruling powers officially classify them as impure abominations. So now another question arises. Who exactly is responsible for creating this flawed race in the first place? Were they made by sorcery? Or is there a specific faction behind their suffering? All the environmental and textual evidence points deep underground into the depths of the Eternal Cities. The Nox are infamous for their alchemical experiments and their relentless obsession with forging a Lord of Night to overflow the Greater Will. The albinaurics share a direct, undeniable origin with the silver tears found in Nokron. They both rely on that exact silver liquid metal. It is highly likely that the albinaurics were the Nox's attempt to refine the silver tears into a fully functioning independent race. However, while the Nox laid the groundwork, the sheer concentration of albinaurics up upon the surface in Liurnia suggests that the sorcerers of Raya Lucaria or the Carian royals heavily piggybacked off this underground research. It is very likely that the sorcerers tried to manufacture these beings to serve as a disposable workforce or an army, which explains why we find them defending Caria Manor and wandering the Academy Gate. This sheer disregard for human life is also seen at its absolute peak at the village of albinaurics. When you arrive in the dark cavern in Liurnia, you find a huge massacre. Piles of bodies are burning, and others are strung up from the bridges in a brutal display of cruelty. Who would do such an evil act? It was Sir Gideon Offner, the supposed all-knowing. Gideon unleashed his quiet enforcer, Ensha, and his depraved perfumers to exterminate the village for a petty reason. He wanted half of a secret medallion that leads the road to a hidden rare area in the consecrated snowfield. This brings us to Latenna, and why she is being so ruthlessly hunted. Gideon wants the albinauric woman because she possesses a secret that threatens to expose the location of the missing Empyrean, Miquella. Latenna holds the knowledge of the hidden path to the Halic Tree, the one place where the albinaurics actually have a chance at a future. Why is the Halic Tree so important to them? And why do so many albinaurics gather there in the freezing cold of the consecrated snowfield? It all ties back to Miquella. Miquella, the Unalloyed, made a profound promise to all the outcasts of the lands between. He built the Halic Tree to be a haven for those who were violently rejected by the Erd Tree, including the misbegotten, the Omens, and the albinaurics. For a race that has only ever known torture, experimentation, and genocide, Miquella was their only true hope. He offered them dignity. We know that Loretta, a former Carian knight, was deeply moved by their plight and personally carved a path to the Halic Tree to give them a safe haven. This is exactly why the first-generation wolf archers so violently defend Ordina, liturgical town. They are defending the only sanctuary their people have ever known. This leads to the deepest lore questions surrounding their existence. Are the albinaurics capable of reproducing, or must they always rely on artificial creation? For their entire history, they were dependent on external creators, mixing silver and celestial dew in a vat. But the conclusion of Latenna's journey offers a massive shift in their destiny. When we carry her spirit across the consecrated snowfield to the apostate derelict, she finally reunites with a towering first-generation albinauric named Philia. Latenna gives Philia a mysterious substance she refers to as the birthling droplet. By delivering this droplet to the giant matriarch, Latenna is attempting to grant her people the biological ability to reproduce on their own. It is one of the rare moments of genuine hope in the entire narrative. For generations, the albinaurics endured horrific persecution, torture, and slaughter simply because they were artificially made and lacked the golden grace of the ruling class. But with the birthing droplet secured, they no longer needed validation or permission to exist from the Golden Order, the Carians, or the Nox. They have taken complete control over their own biology. This relentless attention to detail and environmental storytelling creates an experience so uncompromising that it makes returning to traditional marker-filled titles feel entirely empty, or rather, in terms of Elden Ring, devoid of grace. Exploring the world of Elden Ring sets a different level of standard that permanently alters our tolerance for standard open-world games that have been touched by the graces of Ubisoft. So, step with me into the lands of grace and gods as we dismantle how Elden Ring ruined open-world games.